Hi, and welcome to DCO. My name is David Capetti, and in this video I'm sharing the process for creating this window. There are a few details that we'll go over, but it's going over some basic steps for creating the overall form for the outside frame, then the inside frame, then some of the glass portions here, and then we create a solid to create additional details for the glass window. Also, we create an array at the end, so you can take that copy and just create a set of copies arrayed in one direction. So thank you very much for being here, and let's jump right in. To start, I'm going to create a new document, and this one's going to be in inches. So I'll go here to units and change it from feet into inches, or to whatever units you want to use. Now the reason why I'm using inches is because the window that I'll be creating is typically dimensioned in inches. So that is what I'll be using. Here I'll start with a new Grasshopper document and start here by constructing a point. So I'll go here to construct point, and we'll bring that into a point component so we can actually set the location of that window. Next is thinking about how and what base geometry to use. The best one that I can think of to use is not necessarily a point, because a point is not where you insert a window. Typically a window is going to be like a line. So if we have a line segment, then we can use that as our base geometry for the window. So we can take this point and basically move it here in the X direction. And we'll give it a factor. So we'll go here to 24. This creates a point that has been moved by 24 units in the X direction. Now we can think of how we can put these two together into a line. Let's go here and bring in a line component, which will give us a start and end point that will be the start and end point for our line. Now that we have this, now we can create the base geometry of the height of the window. We can just extrude this so we can visualize how tall the window is going to be. So we'll bring in the extrude component, bring in unit Z, and we'll extrude this up by whatever amount. So I'll just copy this over and call this window width. And this is going to be window height. And these are the overall dimensions of that base geometry. And from here, now we get an idea as to what the height is going to be. And from here, we can create that fixed window. So the next steps are going to be to create that outer frame, then create the glass, and then there's a few details that I'll show you that kind of creates an overall base geometry for a window. With this, let's go to a curve component. And what happens is when you plug in a curve component into a plane like this one, you will get the outer boundary as a closed polyline. So when you hover over the output, you'll get one closed polyline. And the reason why we do this is to create that outer line that we can now offset to create the outer frame. So let's take this, go to offset surface or offset curve, and we'll offset this curve using the plane as the plane input. And now for the distance, since it's offsetting to the outside, we'll go to a negative value and then bring in a new slider. We'll go to 1.5 to offset it by 1.5 to the inside. So here we can call this window frame. So the next part is when we extrude this out, we need to know how far we are going to extrude it, because that's going to be determined by the wall also the material that is inside of the wall and on the outside. So I'll show you that when we create the slider, but let's start with this one, and we're going to plug that into a boundary surfaces, which will give us a surface between those two. I'll hover over here and go to flatten to make sure that they both come in at the same time, therefore giving us here a surface between those two. Next, we'll take these, disable preview, same with that base surface, and we'll take this, and rather than extruding it, what I'm going to do is move it halfway and then extrude it the other way. So I'll go here to move. We are going to extrude in the Y direction, but I can also use amplitude. So by using amplitude and using this surface, it's going to extrude perpendicular to that surface. So we'll use that as the reference for our vector and use that vector for our motion. So we can move that. By default, it's going to give us a 1. Here we'll go to 2.5. 500. And next, what we'll do is extrude it the other way by twice as much. So if, let's say, our wall was going to be 3.5 inches, so this would be wall size. We actually want to do 3.5 divided by 2, because we're starting from the center. Then, once this is moved, then that same surface is extruded in the opposite direction, so negative, and by twice that amount. So go to times 2, which will give me a multiplication of 2. So the vector will multiply by 2, then turn that into a negative, and then plug that into the direction. So this will give us 3.5 from the center, because it's halfway, half of 3, and then halfway in the other half. And so this is what will give us that wall thickness. So let's say if it's 5.5, and our window frame will be 1. This is what's going to start creating our window frame, right? Because there are a few details that go into creating a window. First is going to be the outer frame, then where the window is, and then there are the two portions that kind of sandwich the window in to keep the window in. So we'll be adding all of those details. I found this example online to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. And this is a bit different because this is probably a slider window. As you see here, you have this inside panel that can slide. But the idea is here where you have the bottom frame and then you have the inside portion that holds the glass. So I'll go and move ahead, and I'll go here and just disable the preview on some of these things here. So now we can move on to creating the glass. Let's go here to our surface. Then we went to the offset to the inside. So we'll create a boundary surface and extrude by using amplitude again. So rather than having to do everything all over again, I'll save a few steps by copying all of this. So I'll go here to all of this and copy it down here, and make sure that I just reroute the inputs into the correct one, and that I have a different. So let's copy this and this. Why? Because we want a different size, but we do want this amplitude, but it's going to be a different size, and then it's going to be an extrusion. I'll bring this down, and we'll use that same surface as our extrude reference, and then we'll move this So it extrudes by the same amount. This one, we do want a low amount, like a 0.2. So I'll disable the preview on all of this. Okay, so that's going to be glass. Now let's bring back this inside curve. And now I'll take this, offset it to the inside to create that, I'm blanking on the name, let me find. So I found this detail that has some of the information of what the names are. They go by different names in different details, so let's just kind of continue here. We'll take this and we'll offset it. So we'll go to offset curve. And it's going to offset to the outside. So we want to offset this to the inside. So I'll copy these sliders. And create a boundary surface between those two. So as we did with the other one, right click, flatten the input to get that surface in between. And let's disable the preview on most of this stuff, including that glass here. What we need to do now is, since we have the glass here and we have extruded that by this amount, then divide it in half, then we actually have to take this surface and move it in that same direction. So taking this vector from this extrusion, I'll bring in the amplitude component and then plug that surface in to this one, that to the motion, and then the surface here. Now what I need to plug in is this one here, which is the wall size divided by 2. Actually, no, it's going to be the window thickness. So it's going to be this one. And that's what happens when I don't relabel them right away. They keep the name as the last one, and then that does cause issues. So what I did is I moved it out this amount. Why? Because when I bring back the glass, that is halfway to the outside, which is what we did here. So now we can take this and once again copy this, copy the extrude. Now we'll bring in an extrude and extrude that using amplitude. But rather than using this, we're going to just use a value divided by 2. We'll take we'll do that here. We'll just say 1.5 inches. What happens is that's 1.5 out this way, and then we want to do the same for the other side. But rather than having to do that, we have this extrusion, which gives us the midpoint, which means that we can mirror now this geometry using this plane. So I'm changing the wall size, changing the glass size, which let's say if you had like a double pane glass, you'd have a thicker inner glass. And then we have here the window frame size. So depending on more traditional, you'll have them a little bit bigger. If it's a little bit more modern, sometimes you'll have them a little bit smaller. But it really depends on what style you have. I've seen houses that have really small frames, like for their windows. So this is one way to check that out. Let's go to this, and we can round off the inside also by going here to a fillet. And then a distance here for the radius. We go to 1.5. As you can see here, when I create that curve, it doesn't do that right away. The reason why is because we still have this plugged in with the last one. We want to plug in the new one. And now it's all looking good. Now the cool thing is that you can go to 0 and just keep it this way, but you always have the option to change it up if it's something that you may want to change. So keeping that in mind, let's move forward and see what other details that we can come up with that can change this up a little bit more. First thing that I'll do is I'll clean this up a little bit by organizing some of this. So let's rename this. I'll go to fillet. And this one's going to be frame size, window frame. Okay, let's also give these two all a little bit of a different color. I'll go here to custom preview, and this will allow me to give it a different color by bringing in a color swatch. Color swatch, I'll change this to like a darker gray. And I can always change this and move this down here, or copy it, and then disable the preview on this, and maybe use a lighter color so we can differentiate between the two. And these are just base colors that I use, so they're not actually, yeah, so just using grayscale for now. And let's go to the glass. This one I'll actually give some color. Now it's a little bit easier to visualize what we're doing with the window. And the last thing that I want to do is, rather than have this be like a very squared off section, I want it to be like a chamfer, right? And here, the thing is that there are different ways to do that, but I'm trying to visualize what's going to be the best way. And just looking at this, we have so what happens is, when now that I have all the color previewed, I can't really see what's going on in here. So I have to unplug it by holding down Control. And now I can see the stuff that I'm selecting. So if I'm selecting this and that's not what I want, this is, you'll see that now what I'm going to do is take this, I am going to now offset it and then create a solid that will be subtracted from this overall form. So we'll take this form, which is actually created from this base curve, then it's turned into a surface, then moved up to here. So technically I have to move that same amount, and disable the preview on all of this, because with this, now I can create that solid. So what do I mean by a solid? Because it's probably not making too much sense. What I have to do is offset this to the outside, move it up, and create a surface in between the two, turn that into a solid, and then subtract it from this overall outside. And it'll make sense in a second. So when I take this and we go and offset, and we know that it does offset to the outside, then we can move this using amplitude, the same way we moved everything else. And we can disable the preview on this. So now we have this base curve and we have this offset, and it's offset by the same amount as this extrusion. So we can bypass window frame and plug that back into this one. Now we can take this and loft it together with this one. So if we disable the preview on everything else, we have this, our offset, and this one that we moved up. Now we can loft those two together. And flatten the input. And since that is planar, which means that it's flat, it can create a cap for both sides. So I can take this, type in cap holes, and disable the preview on this. And now bring back this object. Now we've basically created a solid that intersects with this. Now we can type in difference or solid difference and subtract B reps B from B reps A, which will be the frame and the inside frame. What's cool is that now that we've created this object, all we need to do is move what we did here, which was mirror, and we can copy mirror this one. So now that we have this offset, now this distance, it can be different. So we can say 1.500. This can go further out like this. And I'm sure that we can also take this and move it out further. So like it actually creates a little bit more of a thickness here. But for now, I think that kind of covers the idea of what I was trying to do and showing you how you can basically make your script complex as you go. But I would start with using the basic geometry, which is going to be our overall outer frame, our overall glass plane on the inside. Then we have the outer frames, which we kind of detailed a little bit more by creating more details by offsetting some of those curves and then subtracting it from the overall form. So now let's plug in all of these in back into our preview geometry or custom preview. Now we can preview these and do the same for these. So hopefully that made sense as to how to kind of go over and create these. Now there are a lot of other things that I can think of here. One of them being we can shrink down the aspect ratio so there's more gap at the top and bottom, or you can do that same to the outside. But for the most part, this takes care of that window. Now, if you want to create an array or you want to create more than one, that would be the next step, is taking this and creating an array to the right hand side. So we can do this by creating a move component. And let's plug all of these outputs into that component. We're going to move this in the X direction. And we're going to do that a series of times. Now the count is going to be how many? So we want 3 copies. Step is going to be how many, by how much it's going to step. Well, it's going to step the same amount as how big the window is. So we know that the window width is going to be what we want to step by. And we want 3 copies. Now what happens is, since this comes in all organized as one list, it's going to do this value, these values, just to that one list. So we have to go to Graft. With Graft, we basically solve that issue. And like now, as you can see, we are only previewing this first one, which is fine. But if you want to make copies, you can turn this on. You're gonna have to disable the preview on this stuff, which is, not gonna lie, it's a bit of a pain in the butt. But let's go here, disable this, disable preview, and disable preview on all of this stuff. So now you have 3 windows, or an array of windows, by just creating a series of copies on the right hand side. And we can go back down to 1. But what happens is then everything is routed through one component, which makes it tricky for you to change the color on them. So this is why I would disable the preview on this and preview the actual windows. And then if you do want to create an array, then that's something that you can preview if that's what you want. So that covers what I wanted to go over. Let me know if you have any questions. I know that there's other things that we can go over. This is a very basic tutorial as going over those steps. With the glass, we can obviously subdivide it and do more things. We can also create sliders. So those are just some things that kind of pop into mind. But let me know what you think. If you'd like to get a hold of the script that I created for this video, check out my website, capettidavid.com. There you can become a ScriptBulb member, where you can access all of the video scripts that I've created for my YouTube. You can access also the script store, where I have optimized scripts of all various kinds. And lastly, if you want to learn Grasshopper and you've never tried it, or you want to share that with someone, I have a 6-module course that will help anyone get started. I post videos like this that will teach people how to get started using Grasshopper, so make sure to subscribe for future content. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you next time.